you want to create homes and communities that are accessible for everybody, whether they have disability, for a given condition, or simply because they're frail. And this is something we're going to address further in this next session, which is an extension of what you've just heard from George and Faith. So we are going to turn now to Clive Gilbert, who is the policy manager for assistive technology at Policy Connect. They run the all-party parliamentary group for assistive technology, and this event today is a kind of extension of that. Clive has recorded a video for us, which hopefully will not affect your broadbands too much, to make his point. So can I ask you to play the video, please?
Hello. My name is Clive Gilbert, and I'm Policy Manager for Assistive Technology at the cross-party think tank Policy Connect. Our mission is to improve people's lives by working with government and parliament, as well as public, private and third sector organisations across the country to improve public policy. My role in this involves helping to coordinate the activities of the all-party parliamentary group for assistive technology. This is a bipartisan group of MPs and peers that was established in 2017 to promote better assistive technology policy and practice. The group is co-chaired by Lillian Greenwood MP and Lord Lowe of Dalston, CBE. Our aim is to make sure we, as a society, are able to fully harness the power of technology to everyone's benefit. And we work with our industry members to help guide the development of this rapidly growing sector. I will spend the remainder of this brief talk outlining some of our thoughts on multi-generational neighbourhoods. This subject is closely related to an expanding area of work for our APPG, looking at social care and independent living. In particular, we are interested in how the emergence of smart home technologies is providing new ways for older and disabled people to take control over their domestic lives. Digital technology has yet to change the nature of care and support services for disabled and older people. As a policy think tank, we spend a lot of time trying to shape industry practices by influencing government legislation and regulation. The urgency of the social care agenda, exacerbated by the current pandemic, and the new National Strategy for Disabled People, due to be published next year, present opportunities for change. But the substance of change, the innovative technologies, products and services that are needed to make a difference to people's lives, must come from technology manufacturers, designers, builders, architects, retailers, carers, and the public at large. That is why the ISO standard is so important. Here are a few areas that we think the standard should address. The lack of inclusive design in products and services has held up technology adoption among older and disabled people. Smart homes increasingly rely on voice recognition and touchscreen operated smartphones as the key means by which people interact with appliances. This can pose near insurmountable challenges for people who cannot make themselves understood by voice recognition tools or manipulate a touchscreen device. Some people may find it easier to control their systems via an app on their phone, a big button remote control, or the joystick they use to move their electric wheelchair. It is up to product developers to make sure these options are available. Another key issue is compatibility between technologies from different manufacturers. It is one of the ironies of the connected home era that many devices are unable to talk to each other. Smart systems that are designed to lock users into using a particular narrow range of products limit choice for all consumers, but can be particularly problematic for people who rely on specialist assistive technologies. It is important to make sure that each individual has a bespoke solution that fits around their lifestyles. The technology has to be able to adapt, so it can be personalized around each individual, and interoperability is a vital part of that. An individual's preferences may change over time, so it is important that all parts of their setup can be adjusted as required. We must also think about the environment in which the technology is used. For example, much of the social care sector has yet to be penetrated by the technological changes of the past few decades. Housing developers are often reluctant to install extra cables, and retrofitting an existing building can be even more expensive. Each of these issues have multi-layered causes. Resolving them will require changes not only to policy and regulation handed down by government, but also updating sector-wide cultures and practices. We need to convince technology companies to adopt inclusive design processes, support the social care profession to make technology part of their everyday routines, and persuade house builders that 21st century homes must keep up with 21st century tech if they are to meet the needs and aspirations of an aging and increasingly disabled population. Developing a widely accepted set of industry standards will be vital to achieving this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Clive. Lovely to see you well after the time we spent together last year. I see that the agenda is still very much the same. Let's make sure that house builders and tech companies are more responsive. I'm wondering if you think they are. We'll come to that when we get to the Q&A, because I want to move on now with Victoria Leeson, who is the Senior Specialist for Investments at Homes England, and we will put together the questions and answers at the end of this. So Victoria, if I can hand over to you, thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Great. Hello, and thank you very much for the invite. So I'm Victoria Leeson, and I work for Homes England, and I work on the investment side, working with small and medium-sized developers build homes, and I see the design issues that we come across all the time, and how that into the long term is going to affect future generations, and how these neighbourhoods really need to be brought together through really good design. So I'll just move on to a little bit of my background. So my background has been working with registered providers of social housing, and also with a disability charity for 9 years, working with a design panel that had a lot of influence on how we designed new homes moving forward. And I just wanted to point out that we should be looking at housing as very inclusive, not just for the elderly generation, but all the way through, so that we have multiple communities living together side by side, so that houses can be adapted for anyone's use. So, you know, of the disability population, 84% of disabilities are actually acquired. And 1 in 5 people have a disability in the UK. So we're not talking about small numbers. We're talking about every new home we build, 1 in 5 are going to have a disability. And therefore, what are those homes? How can we adapt them? How can we make them accessible for everyone, giving them that choice? And if I move on to the next slide. Victorian terraces are very adaptable, but have they got everything that people need? And one of the things that we look at always is how are we wiring up? How are we connecting new housing estates? Have they got fibre as well as copper wire? When we come to adapting houses, we put in specialist intercoms or specialist Wi-Fi. If we need video, if we need talking, you need that breadth of broadband. So, you know, we really need to make sure that this whole country is covered by Wi-Fi, fibre and copper, and give people that choice when they move in, so that they can bring in their adaptive tools and smart technology to suit them as individuals. I also am looking at housing across the piece in terms of communities, and there is need for specialist housing. There is need for supportive housing, but how you deliver that financially is really quite interesting in terms of tenure and making sure that we're also tenure blind, so that we can go from supportive housing for affordability and also open market side by side. I think those things are really important and should be choices. At the moment, quite often you are limited to either local authority choice or open market choice with the likes of McCarthy and Stone. And actually, is there something that we can all link into, join in together and live together in neighbourhoods that are multi-generational and really multi-generational? Just moving on a couple of slides to building regulations, part M. This is something that quite often comes up in terms of building on sites, in terms of private rented and also social affordable. So part 4/1, absolute regulation you must meet in the UK. However, if you have a visiting guest that may have a walking frame or wheelchair, it's going to be quite undignified to use your downstairs loo when they're built to this regulation, when you can't actually access it without leaving the door open. So there needs to be some sort of look in terms of tenure blind, making sure that every house has that ability. And if you'll see on the next slide, we've got accessibility in terms of part 2 and 3, which give much better access to visiting guests. Or if you acquire that injury during your lifetime and you're in your home, when you get out of hospital, you're fine because you can use the downstairs loo. It's a very difficult adaptation to make in a home, is to get that extra space standard if you haven't got it already. And quite often when we were working in the charity sector, we would have to decline houses that didn't have this standard because we couldn't adapt it. So it's a really important thing that we need to do. Just moving on quickly, just in terms of some design standards that I worked on at Bradbury House, making them all fully wheelchair accessible, but also making them attractive for young and old. We talk about old people, possibly, you know, their tastes have changed over the time. So I know my parents are in their 80s, yet they live in a 1960s house that looks very modern, with programmes on the telly. You know, people's aspirations are really going up, and, you know, and they really want new, they want modern designs. That's not to say that you can't make traditional houses also with the same space standards that we need. We can do that as well. We've just got to make sure that we've got the critical space that we need for future adaptations. And I'll just move on the slides as I'm running out of time. And I'll just quickly move to Building for Life 12 standard, which is all about design and about connectivity, not just in the house, but how do you get from the house to the shops? Are the landscapes suitable for wheelchair access, for multiple disabilities? Are they beautiful? Is it a nice place to live? This is where people's choice comes into it. And I believe that if we can get really good quality design with a set standard that people have to meet, we will raise the game in terms of neighbourhoods being truly community-based, multi-generational, with people to have that choice when they move into new homes, but also old homes, and making sure they're adaptable, making sure that we've got that connectivity, making sure that you find your way around through landmarks and visible clues. And just lastly, I would go to how can we do that in terms of a standard? How can we prove good design before we build it? And there are technologies out there now that mean you can see designs in 3D. You can walk around virtually around a place, before it's built to make sure it's accessible. You can put headsets on and have a look. And if you're in a wheelchair, if there's a step you can't go that way, you can see it. So there are these technologies out there that I think over the next 3 years we should definitely embrace. We should definitely get them on board to make sure that we can build things to a better quality, a better standard that are fit for everyone, so that we can really give choice to people wherever they want to live. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think that speaker after next, Simon Bayliss, is perfectly suited, because on the one hand, we've got Clive saying that architects and developers need to plan for the integration of technology. And he's one of those that is in the hot seat for doing that, but also Victoria's talking about how critical the aesthetics are as well, and she's shown some great images, and I know this is something which is very dear to Simon's heart. But before that, another member of the all-party parliamentary group for assistive technologies, and somebody who is completely committed to innovation in this space. Cynthia Bullock is the Deputy Director for the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund at Innovate UK. I don't know why I think of Vice when I think of you. So without further ado, please, Cynthia, say hello.
Thank you, Ian, and hopefully everyone can hear me. So just to say a big thank you for the opportunity to speak to the audience. As Ian has mentioned, I work at UK Research and Innovation, and I am part of the Healthy Aging Challenge, which supports the UK government's Aging Society Grand Challenge. So this is the ambition to ensure that people can enjoy at least 5 extra healthy, independent years of life by 2035, while narrowing the gap between the experiences of the richest and the poorest. Now, we know and have heard again today that aging society presents an incredible opportunity for businesses and researchers, particularly those who can support people to stay in their homes for longer, tackle loneliness, increase independence, safety and well-being. And this is largely by developing and delivering inclusive and innovative products and services. Now, we know evidence shows that well-designed, good quality housing and neighbourhoods help people to stay warm, safe, socially connected and healthy. Notwithstanding this, there is a significant potential to ensure that new housing is, of course, of good quality and does meet lifetime home standards. But we know that the majority of homes that will exist in 2050 have already been built. And despite this knowledge, improving and adapting existing homes is a relatively neglected and underinvested market space. So clearly, adaptations and improvements of existing homes would make a major contribution to healthy aging, and designing those homes so that they are inclusive across the life course should mean that older and younger people, which a few people mentioned, are and remain situated in multi-generational communities, which should facilitate ongoing engagement with their workplaces, with civic, community and family involvement. Innovation in this space would contribute both to maintaining functional ability and also preventing decline in capacity. Ours and others' reviews highlight that there is a particular need for innovators to develop desirable, inclusive and affordable mainstream home products and services to help people of all socio-economic spectrum to remain active, productive, independent and socially connected. According to Centre for Aging Better, these include designing major fixtures and fittings and everyday products for the home so that they remain usable as intrinsic capacity declines. This is about redesigning and rebranding more adaptive products. So my example here is the Ford Focus for a mainstream market to encourage people to purchase these before they are needed. It's about developing smart home and connected products, services, and applications that enable activities of daily living, and marketing and branding these in age-friendly ways. It's about developing innovative, flexible, age-friendly financial products and services for significant home adaptations. So perhaps something around equity release or new approaches to equity release. It's about developing new models of cost sharing for landlords and tenants, and it's about developing new services and business models for low-cost home adaptations and improvements, as well as low-cost designs for walkable streets and neighbourhoods or local green and blue spaces. For us, the value of an ISO standard for multi-generational neighbourhoods is that it will help improve the knowledge of what models already exist and work with respect to regulation, coordinating health and social care in neighbourhoods to make the best and most effective use of local services. It's about integrated technology and designs of what these new age friendly homes and neighbourhoods needs to look like. Success begets more investment, which begets more success. The value of an ISO standard is that it could also help address the barriers that limit the uptake of disruptive solutions and business models across the supply sectors, thereby accelerating the rate of adaptation of age-friendly homes and multi-generational neighbourhoods. The question of what constitutes an age-friendly home or neighbourhood can't be addressed through the lens of a single sector or discipline. Encouraging greater cooperation across research, development and commercialization will enable key supply sectors such as the construction, service, tech and health industries to understand the imperative to work more collaboratively and effectively. The outcome could be a clear evidence-based outline of the roadmap to investment, enabling more targeted strategic action by all stakeholders, including older people themselves. The UK government's Ageing Society Grant Challenge aims to provide a platform to support these multi-sectorial, industry-led collaborations to ensure that people can genuinely enjoy at least 5 extra healthy independent years by 2035, whilst addressing inequalities. The Healthy Aging Challenge, of which I am part of, supports the Grand Challenge ambition and aims to enable businesses, including social enterprises, to develop and deliver products, services, and the business models that underpin that, so that things can be adopted at scale, which support people as they age. The objective here is to bring together innovators across UK businesses, universities, charities, government, and as I mentioned, all the people themselves to support the development and delivery of innovative solutions that people actually want to buy. We aim to maximize the contribution of each of those component parts to the benefit of everyone. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bullock. That is a reflection on the fact that if we get this right, it's good business. And I would like to turn now to Simon Bayliss, who's the managing partner at HTA Design. As I said before, there are already 2 burning questions that he can answer. So over to you, Simon.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly, and thank you to Ian for orchestrating such a phenomenal day. I'm going to talk a bit about the physical aspect of how we might deliver better places for more sympathetic multi-generational neighbourhoods and housing. This is something we as a practice have been interested in all our career. We're 50 years old as a practice. I haven't been there from the outset, but we're perhaps unusual in that we are multidisciplinary. We combine the skills of architects and urban designers, landscape architects, planners, and graphic designers and many other design talents. But actually we're only focused on a single sector, which is the places that people might choose to live. And I start the presentation with a slide here, which I think is particularly apposite, and it's of Hannam Hall, a development that perhaps doesn't look that familiar to most people who are very aware of the standards of British housing, but it's actually in the outskirts of Bristol. And actually perhaps is the best example that I can think of a successful multi-generational neighbourhood that exists at the moment. And to follow on from Victoria's presentation, it's perhaps a signpost of how these developments might come about, being a scheme that was delivered with the innovation and research of the private sector and a national house builder at that, but underpinned by the public sector setting the standards and the aspirations. Now, I'm going to just see if I can move the slides on. I don't know if I can do that or if someone can do that for me. It's worth noting, and this is one of the prototype houses modelled in 3 dimensions to understand the spatial dynamics of it. It's worth noting that the UK housing is already set by a high number of standards. There are a lot of things that determine how we might hit standards for accessibility and mobility and the like, but not particularly around quality. And I think that's something that this standard could do something to bring to bear. From our point of view, we assess and attempt to design everything from good first principles to ensure that the spaces that we're creating are going to be of significant benefit to the life and the lifestyle of the people who might live there. So this particular house put living space at the ground and the first floor, allowed bedrooms to be on the ground and the first floor also, aspects to the front and to the rear, and that drew people to sit in their front garden as well as their back garden, and that drove community, and that's something that we've heard a lot about through the course of today, and indeed something that we've perhaps seen quite a lot more of over the past 10 weeks. Just click on the slide one more, please. So I don't know if I can take control. And what's important is to ensure that those spaces inside are not only flexible and adaptable, but they bring that space and light that brings comfort to people's lives. That they may spend more time inside, and when doing so, we need to make sure that the rooms and the spaces that they're inhabiting are going to keep them uplifted and feeling well. I think on the next slide, we'll see how the homes need to combine with what I've called biophilic landscape, and that's an important aspect of connecting people much more closely with their landscape, and that's where perhaps the home begins to form a neighbourhood. You can see here the housing that I've been talking about in Hannam, and in the foreground some greenhouses that were repurposed. So a fundamental part of bringing the two together is essential to success. On the next slide, hopefully we can see what's beginning to happen now is some developers coming in and developing whole neighbourhoods with principles of that heart of it. And the next slide will just begin to flick through some of the features that I think we need to understand. Building it to a higher standard, making sure that we've got internal specifications that suit everybody with spacious rooms, adaptable and mobile spaces, and then shared communal facilities that bring together communities and ensure that they can be driven to do more things as groups of people of all ages. And this is, I think, the emerging scene of rental housing at all scales, urban and suburban, high-rise and low-rise. It's being built to a higher standard, it's more spacious, and it's providing more facilities within a managed and supportive environment. And this isn't just really for the aged, this is for people of all times of their life, and it's bringing people together, I think, in a whole new generation of housing, which I think is quite interesting. So this is perhaps at the more urban scale. Move back to the suburban scale and how we might seek to build a better way of not only designing our homes to be more flexible and adaptable, but building them in factories to a higher standard, a higher performance, to make sure that they will stand the test of time. And I think that probably brings me to the end of the final slide, is just to seek out how we might begin to learn from places of the past, bring that into the future, and create, I think, a new standard which the ISO should underpin. Thank you very much.
I think you did that at 6:30 this morning, if I'm not mistaken, Simon, and it's absolutely brilliant. The illustrations, was it 6:30?
Something like that.
Yeah, the illustrations are brilliant, really desirable. We'll come back to you momentarily. Right now, we're going to move on to Meryl Davis, who's the CEO of Re-Engage, to give the perspective of older adults. Yes, Meryl, is it true that older adults want nothing to do with technology? Are you there?
Thank you, Ian. Hello. Hi.
Hello.
No, absolutely. Older people do want to interact with technology and do understand technology to differing degrees. And I think that, the most important thing for us always to remember is that differentiation. And I think that especially what we've learned in the last 10 weeks is that people are adapting to technology, and I think we've probably got some catching up to do with our understanding of people's understanding. Just a little bit about where we're coming from. I run a charity called Re-Engage, and we work right across the UK, and we've been in existence for more than 50 years. And until last year, we were actually called Contact the Elderly. And we had volunteers who ran and continue to run social groups for the old in their communities. So we work always with people who are over 75, who live alone and who struggle to get out. The average age of the older people that we work with is 85. So what we've got from that history, that 55 years of working in this way, is the really strong roots into multi-generational connections in the UK, and a very clear understanding of the epidemic of loneliness. In the last couple of years, we've been on a journey, and now as Re-Engage, what we're doing is continuing to exist to provide opportunities for older people to remain social and connected at a time in their lives when friendship and connections can disappear completely, and this is for people who are living alone in their own homes. We're very much focused on multi-generational connections and social connectedness, and we're also, very much focused on thinking about how we go about identifying when people are socially isolated and lonely. In general, when we first meet people, they're healthy, they're long-lived, they've made it. They're resilient, and actually they're really inspirational for younger people. The volunteers that work with us describe working with older people as strangely addictive. And I would say that, certainly the 14,000 people who volunteer with us every year very much feel, their understanding of community is very much impacted by their volunteering with us. And the other thing that we've learned over the years, I think, is that the real differences of many of the things we talked about today, and particularly the rural-urban differences and so on. And of course, now as we look to rethink the way we work, we want to make sure that we do that with an understanding of those differences. I would say that one of the really important things as well that we know is that a strong appeal of the work that we do is that we provide free transport and help people to get outside the house. So our new strategy now has at its heart 3 points that I think are critical for today. First of all, the importance of difference in later life. And older people are, that we know as a society we marginalise older people. We are consistently ageist, even in places where we believe that we're not, and we lack ways to differentiate sufficiently. So too often the common denominator is older or lonely. And that's a significant barrier to actually working with the people that we want to work with. And we all know that throughout life we have identities that we want to sustain and we want to identify as. And that's where we get our communities and our communities of interest. So we're very much looking at the alternative differentiators. Yes, everybody's over 75, but what actually do we have in common? We also feel that we've got to really pursue our understanding of when it is that we become too old, that there's a sort of a moment when people are perceived of as just old, not old and something else. And I think that there's a real important understanding of getting under the skin of how we as a society think about older people. And then there's real potential for technology for us. We've learned a lot about that, as I say, in the last 2 months. But all too often, I think that when we think about technology and older people, there's this really strong perception that it's there to help other people. It's there to help the carers or the medical staff. And I completely, see where Dr. Crook's coming from with the discussion around the importance of collecting data and so on, and it does really help. But at the same time, technology has to be there to help the older person in their own right. And too often technology is perceived of as requiring somebody at the other end. There is, plenty of discussion of technology so that, and again, we've seen this recently, so that family members can send photographs through, or so that family members can receive information from older people. We find ourselves working with a lot of older people who simply haven't got those family members, simply haven't got that closeness. So we're really keen to work with partners to develop a greater understanding of the use of technology by older people, where older people are right now, and then how we can create things which are safe, secure, but not just so that the older people are safe because it's connecting them to other people, but also that they feel safe so that they can create their communities of interest themselves.
Thank you very much, Meryl. Right on cue. I think the point that's really important there is whether we call them the elderly or older people, at the end of the day, we're all individuals, and we don't reach a certain point and then suddenly we become this group. We're still individuals and we need to treat people as such, and technology can actually help you to express yourself. And I think that's an important part of the equation. We'll talk more about that a little later on. David Prendergast is giving a talk on personas in terms of how a technology company or a built environment needs to plan for the needs of the many, but now those people that we're talking about have rights. We need to take care of those rights. We need to give real consideration to the security issues, the privacy issues, and the ethics. And Karen Holden has a relatively short period of minutes to convey such a difficult subject, but she is our ambassador, if you will, for ethics in this space, and she's the founding partner and director of a city law firm. Karen?
Hi, thank you. Yes, really interesting conversations going on there. I'll obviously try and keep this brief, and Ian, you might need to help me how you move the slides on. So yeah, I set a law firm up 12 years ago, so we work for a lot of private companies in the commercial sector. But obviously over the last few years, this has now become very much heavy tech related, from drones to artificial intelligence. So, we look at obviously all the positives with technology, but there are risks. So, there are inherent vulnerabilities. How much do you trust technology over human fallibility?
One sec, I can't see you.
Oh.
Can we see Karen, please?
I've got my video on.
Carry on.
Okay.
Carry on.
Okay, sorry, you've removed my slides now, so.
Slides. It's not me.
Basically,
it's not
I was talking about the inherent risks that come with this. So obviously we've all heard about EasyJet and BA recently with the hacking of the data, passport information, credit cards. So obviously we've got to really take into account the protection of client data, the storage of data, who has access to it. We are all entitled to confidentiality and privacy. So, we have started putting controls in place with the GDPR Data Protection Act. We've got some really robust security products out there, as well as legislation. But what I would really like to see more so is, rather than the slow plod of the law trying to keep up with the technology, the actual designers of the technology, the disruptors, the people in our space that are giving us all these fantastic opportunities, they really now need to consider themselves, how they get consent, how transparent they are with data, what kind of knowledge do we need as consumers to have about this. and therefore then work with the regulators to make it clear what they do and don't have, what protections they suggest we need. And then actually the regulators can put a wrapping around that. And in collaboration, we've got more chance of the strong arm of the law meeting up with the disruptive technology and complementing each other, not only to give regulations and enforce and monitor, but actually genuinely know we are protecting that data. Because at the moment, Facebook and WhatsApp tell you so many things about how you're protected. But do we really know? Do we have somebody who really understands what they're doing? Does the regulator even know? Or do they only come in when it's too late, when something wrong has happened? So that kind of collaboration I would really love to see moving forward in the future, especially if we're going to start doing things like in the Agile Homing Project. We were talking about having fridges for diabetes, or we were going to have floor with regards to the heat, or telling us when there's breathing difficulties. At what level do you want to give information? At what level is that protected? How do we work out the privacy, the confidentiality, everything together? Because we know the law can't at the moment keep up. Technology is so streets ahead of the framework. I don't know if we could just move on to the other slide kindly. So, we have to understand that case law has been developed over centuries. It's still outdated. It's still very much the letter of the law. And it's only when it goes to court, when something's gone wrong, do we then rethink things, readjust things. So something always has to happen before we then adapt the law. Well, technology is changing by the second. We really need to have very adaptable laws. It needs to be really robust at the moment. So things like in drone law, we've changed the legislation, but already that's out of date. The drone law focused on the hobbyists that are causing problems in the airports, but that's not who are operating it mainly. It's now hindering the commercial sector, who are already regulated, safe, secure. We kind of went the wrong way and we didn't really understand the problem and address it properly. So again, technology is fantastic. The law wants to regulate it, but they're so out of sync at the moment. And how we join those and collaborate is so, so important. I don't want to take the human element out of it. Technology should always be there to help us, not like jump in front of us. And it was interesting when we last met Ian in the group, a lot of people were saying Alexa is fantastic, really brings loneliness out of people, that they can talk, they can interact. But then other people will say they hate it because their children think we've got all these technologies and precautions now, we don't need to go and see them as much. And that was hindering the social structure of their family. So we've also got to consider great technology, great law, put all the GDPR in place, protect the data. But what about the humans? They still need human interaction. Let's not replace that. So yeah, there's a lot of ethics, there's a lot of legal consequences in what we do. But again, we must be really careful to keep embracing the human element in this, what we want it for, why we're doing it, but also who's controlling the data. Do I control my own data that I give you? Is the law controlling what you do with my data? So do they even understand that? Do the technology developers control our data? We really have to be very clear on all of that. So, I mean, we've still got a very, very long way to go. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour. I'd also like to just quickly introduce Jackie, who is going to touch on one topic, Ian, that you asked over the weekend on iOS and the standardisation. And I don't know if Jackie, who's the director and head of commercial, would like to just jump on of those, because then actually she can engage in how that's now moving forward. Are you there, Jackie?
Yeah, hi everybody. I was just going to look at the effect of having standardisation and moving towards the ISO collaboration, and really from our perspective and just from an ethical perspective, asking whose standards, whose ethics are you actually going to be using? So I think that it's already been touched on, particularly by a question a few speakers ago, regarding cultural differences in terms of older generations and how that's dealt with. So if we are moving towards a standard approach, we need to be very careful that we're not just using a UK-centric standard, or that we're not just applying what the Western values and the views are on an international landscape. So when you look at technology and the fact, so most prominent in terms of AI, so artificial intelligence, and where there's a real need for asking whose ethics, whose values, whose morals are we using. And for centuries, the law has been based on morality to some extent, and trying to put in place safeguards and measures around a form of ethics, a form of morality. And where technology doesn't necessarily have that human element to some degree, that people will disagree with that. On what basis do we install that level of morality back in there? So it's really just putting out there the question and the consideration from my perspective, which is whose standards, whose morality, whose ethics, and who is the best placed person to make that decision. Going back to the level of the idea of standardization from another legal perspective, so aside from morality, aside from human rights, just from a purely risk perspective and a commerce perspective, obviously there's a considerable benefit in standardization, and the fact that from Karen is more the litigator than I am, but you can then adhere a standard in the form of a dispute or in terms of a level of expectation. I think a few speakers ago, people were speaking about how you can bring the future of housing and multi-generational housing to a wider pool, and to other developers who may be more cost centric in terms of where they're looking more at their margins, as opposed to people who have considerable resources to throw at it. From our perspective, looking at putting in place standardization allows for competition. It allows to actually widen the market and say, well, actually, we know what the aspirations look like, so we're going to move to that, and it's a standard to which we're all going to work to, so we know how we can achieve that and hopefully widen that pool. I think that's conveniently where I was going to end anyway. So
thanks, Jackie.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Karen. That is just a taste of the issues that we're looking at. I'm going to turn now to Mac McCann, who's the CEO and founder of Access Earth. Actually, we share a project, which is a Horizon 2020 project called Shapes, and it's a multi-country initiative. I'll let Matt talk about it and David a little bit later on, but the point is that there's a standards group and an ethics committee that's been set up. Huge amount of work needs to go into it if you're starting to engage with older adults across different territories. So we're really kind of just scratching the surface. But Matt, are you around? If
yes,
so, please say hello.
Can you hear me at all? Or
we can indeed. Can't see you yet. Hopefully we will. There you go.
Yes. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ian, for the opportunity to talk during this event. And as I said, we're involved, Access Earth, as a partner in the Shapes initiative, which is around sort of the idea of building a pan-European platform on smart, healthier aging and care within the community. And sort of our aspect on that is around providing accessibility data very much from the built environment perspective. Now, a lot of this morning's events has been more about how we can homes are being built, but also it's important to think about how the built environment itself interacts with that house. So what we do is we provide a platform through apps and websites to allow people to share and find accessible information about whether it's a hotel, restaurants, coffee shops, that kind of thing. And while right now, with the aspect of the COVID situation, it's had an interesting effect in that COVID as a social disability has been a really interesting part of how people are beginning to feel, how some people with disability are and how it's difficult for them to access the built environment, and now it's also difficult for everyone else to access the built environment. So it's important to take the learnings from this to look at how we can, particularly from an ISO standard, look to businesses to try and build the businesses themselves more accessible, particularly with the advent of, say, social distancing measures. You're looking at how there's an extra challenge that businesses now have on making room for the social distancing as well as for the additional wheelchair users. And one of the ways we do that is through, as I mentioned, the crowdsourcing aspect of our platform, where the key thing that we try and push is that accessibility is for everyone. There's a global population of about 1 billion people that have some form of access needs. But if you include family, friends, work colleagues, it's about half the world's population need accessibility information in some form. And that's sort of the aim of what we're doing as a company, and also as part of this Wider Shapes initiative, is we're looking at how we can use accessibility data to help make the built environment more accessible for everyone. And our main looks at this, we work with local authorities from a smart cities perspective, and how we can even look at where we're placing accessible parking bays within towns and cities. So say for the advent of more pedestrianised city centres, you're still going to need accessible parking bays. And so that makes it even more important as to look at how you can design cities for the future that's more inclusive. But equally, one of our main clients would be in the area of sport. And if excuse the pun, sport is the great equalizer. Everyone wants in some way to be able to interact with their community, and these large gatherings, while they look different now for the near future, it's incredibly important. And if some large venues like a stadium can look to adapt themselves to make themselves more accessible for people as the current situation progresses, then we want to be able to extend that to the smaller businesses too, to make sure that, with the homes of the future being as accessible as we hope that they ought to be with this ISO standard as well, we want that to extend to the businesses and to the wider built environment, so that that can also be as accessible as we all hope. And I think I'll leave it there. Thanks very much, Ian.
You caught me off guard there. I didn't see the end coming. It was a kind of wham bam. Thank you, ma'am. Excellent. Thank you. What I'm going to do, if people don't mind, is I'm going to bring Sam McGuire from University of the Third Age and bolt her on to the end of this session, because she has another event that she needed to attend, and in fact it is as relevant to this session, her approach in relation to older adults, as it is in relation to policy matters. So I'm throwing everybody, including the tech team here, if there is a presentation, which I'm not sure of at this moment in time.
No, there's no presentation.
Excellent. So you're just going to wing it, aren't you, Sam?
I'm going to wing it. Yeah.
Right, okay, so go for it.
Thank you. Hello, Ian. Hello, everybody. First to say, like others said, I'm really, really pleased to be involved in the discussion today and in the development of the ISO Multigenerational Housing Standard. And really, I think a lot of what I want to say is possibly following on from what Meryl Davies said of re-engage. And I've certainly known of their work and, of course, Contact the Elderly, the prior name to that, for many years, and the great work they do. I guess, I come from an organisation called the University of the Third Age. We work with 1,040 charities across the United Kingdom, and 420,000 retired people are part of our movement. And one of the things I think that has been brought into sharp relief for us is the impact of COVID-19 and COVID-19 and best intentions. So I think what COVID-19 has highlighted is that even with best intentions, it's easy for older people to be labelled as vulnerable or lonely or isolated. And of course, there is absolutely no denying that people can be all of those things, but they don't define getting older. And I think the challenge to all of us is about defining and representing and speaking about people as they age. If you speak to people, to older people or people as they age, what's really clear is that nobody is ever born old. So people have the same desires and aspirations, and as well as that, the same indignation of being talked down to as all the rest of us. And whether you're speaking to somebody who is 70 or 80 or 90, or in many cases in the youth even over 100, I can absolutely guarantee that an older person will be somebody else and not the person you're speaking to. So I guess the challenge to everyone, and I mean all of us, is don't make assumptions when we're thinking about older people, but begin with the person themselves in mind. And that's quite often easier to say than to do, because we all take shortcuts and we all challenge ourselves about how we work with older people. And certainly, as someone else remarked earlier in this day, which has been great, we are speaking to people who in the main are a like-minded set of organisations with the desire to make change. However, it has to be said that still there is an awful lot of views and thoughts about how the phrase older people is interpreted and how that plays out in practice. So we did a piece of work a while back called Learning Not Lonely, and that was a study of Youth Ray members and the impact of valuing learning really as you got older. And one of the key things that came out of that was valuing the person and not the number of lived years. People said that what was really important to them about being part of a major community was that there was, first of all, a culture of inclusivity. So in other words, you valued the person rather than the background they came from. The fact that it didn't matter how many qualifications, or indeed if you had no qualifications at all, that everybody's contribution was important. And actually they weren't defined by their previous work or a partner or their family situation, but they were defined by themselves. And I feel that this approach of looking at people rather than the situation they find themselves is really important when we're considering standards going forward, because you're trying to look at a collective of people rather than a collective of people defined by an age. And just picking up a couple of other points that people have mentioned, I absolutely agree. Don't assume that older people can't manage tech. Without a shadow of a doubt, there are some people that can find that a challenge, but there are many more who can and do use technology. And in a recent survey of 3,500 Youth Ray members aged 60 to 90 that we undertook in our own organisation, because we wanted to challenge our own thinking about technology, we found that the majority of members aged 60 to 90, so 82% of those people, access the internet on most days, and 93% could be contacted by email. And the majority of those people had a smartphone, laptop or tablet. So actually, that was a challenge to my own organisation as much as to anybody else's. The pick-up and take-up of technology was much, much wider than we originally thought. And the desire to take part and use those sort of facilities was big. I'm not saying that it's not a problem, that there aren't people who don't access the internet or can't access the internet, because there are, without a shadow of a doubt.
But I think the importance of actually ensuring that we don't assume that people may not be able to use technology as much as the next person just because of their age is definitely something to be challenged. And indeed, one of the things that we have just done is take our model of learning, which is traditionally people sitting together in people's homes, learning together things that they're interested in, you know, Japanese or French or ancient history, whatever it is, and actually putting that all onto Zoom. And people across the United Kingdom and our movement have taken to Zoom like ducks to water. I mean, it's been absolutely quite amazing. And so, you know, a real example about don't make assumptions about tech. In terms of actually housing itself, the things that people say should be really should be thought about and are important are that moving should be easier. Often moving is a massive hurdle to some people, not only just because they've put down emotional roots in their homes, but just even about finding people to help them move, whether it's, you know, local companies or whether it's things that need to be dismantled. None of that is very easy. It's even more hard if you live in some kind of social housing and you're looking for a home swap. So moving should be easier. So actually housing, as others have said, needs to be seen in a much wider context, looking at things like safety and transport and access to services. And so the age-friendly domains are really good indicators as to that. Ideally to be near friends and families, definitely not in older people's ghettos. Again, a point that's been raised over and over again today. And a real desire for intergenerational community. So this is what people are saying to us. They want to be near people of other ages. And in that, remembering people that live without families, aging without children, a very good movement, and have got something to say about people in that particular space. Also recognising lifetime homes, affordability, energy efficient, and having enough space within your home, and having space to accommodate at least one other family member. So I'd like just to end by saying that I feel having an ISO standard would enable a real commitment to be working towards aspirations of people as they age in housing. And we would really like an age forum built into this development framework, where older people have a real voice and where their contribution can be taken seriously, and where they're looked at in terms of a life of lived experience rather than an age. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. I do have one point that I must raise with you, because we talk about older adults and proximity to technology. And I recall there's a cultural context to this, because a few weeks ago you sent me an email in relation to letters that you've been receiving, or emails that you've been receiving, from over 70s who had not been online before, who suddenly wanted to go online, didn't they? Why? What was the driver? As you said, these are people who have not expressed any interest in social media. In fact, they shy away from all of this. What was the deciding factor?
The deciding factor was they wanted to do their own shopping during COVID, and they didn't want to have to wait to have shopping undertaken by someone else for them. They wanted to make their own choices. They wanted to do their own shopping, and that was important to them. They were in control. They knew what they wanted, and they didn't want somebody else to do that for them.
There you go. So there's a, needs, want, etc. And it makes a difference. So, Nell, you had a question that you wanted to put to members of the panel. Could you go ahead?
Yeah, so there was one question from the audience that I thought might be relevant, maybe more related to the beginning part of this the talks. So how could standards actually comprehensively cover multi-ability? So not only with a person of an older age, because there's so many crossovers between inclusive developments for disability and for an aging population.
Who would like to have a shot at that one? Either speak or put your hand up. Either will work. I'm going to ask. Okie dokie, you're on there.
I think it's incredibly difficult to set things in simple written standards or even diagrammatic form that can cover the multitude of instances. But I think that's what the standard has to try and do if it's going to be effective and it's going to be adopted and brought into bear to developers. Developers are actually very good at responding to standards. If there's a level playing field, they're buying land or bidding for projects on the basis of a known set of criteria. They're actually very capable, as I've shown at my Hannam Hall project, of meeting the highest possible standards. But they do need clarity on what that requires. And sometimes that probably has to be distilled down into some quite blunt requirements in terms of spatial configuration, in terms of specific accessibility standards, many of which do exist in different aspects of building control and will obviously differ from different countries around the world. So I think it's possibly a process of bringing together some of the best in-class standards that already exist, trying to assimilate them into a very clear document, and ensuring that can be distilled down into really clear statements that can be applicable around the world and internationally for all markets.
Thank you for that. I do have a question that I want to put to Clive in relation to progress. Clive, are you still online?
Yeah.
Assuming you are. No?
Yes.
Yeah, it's great. Are you seeing any progress? I mean, you were with us a year ago expressing concern about the developers who are not taking account of the need for this technology within their planning, taking account of the architects who are not thinking about inclusivity. We've brought you into a wider conversation that is about aging as well as people with disabilities. Are you seeing anything that gives you any cause for optimism?
Well, there are growing pockets. There are growing pockets. There are growing pockets. There are growing pockets in the industry where there is interest. And they're accommodating diverse needs. And accommodating diverse needs. And accommodating. I've had a lot of discussion with smart home sector. It's had a lot of discussion with smart home sector, for example. We're just starting to just starting to dip their toes in this sector. In these issues. Yeah. So. And actually, hoping that and I see hoping that and this is hope in the things like the KNX things like the KNX standards for smart home. The smart interoperability, which promote interoperability into the operability. Yeah, but it's vital to continue. But it's vital to continue arguing. I'm making a case. I'm making a case. What companies can respond? For companies to respond to different needs.
Okay, so an event like this can draw together the kind of interest that you're looking for. On a scale of 1 to 10, are you seeing a sense that this kind of more collective conversation with the potential of having a standard which takes account of disability and an aging population and creates some kind of equality in that frame? On a scale of 1 to 10, how positive are you feeling in terms of direction?
That's a 7. But
Okay, what were you last year, Clive? If you're 7 now, what were you last year?
5.
Okay, that's progress. That's what I want to hear. Excellent. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute delight to have your voice as part of the mix, and we will continue because you also are representing the all-party parliamentary group, so it's a collective and incredible work you're doing is something that I find incredibly inspiring. I think we are going to thank that panel. We are running late, as you've seen, and